Animal communication. I want to talk first about the difference between apes and humans. We know that apes can communicate, but not nearly to the degree that humans do, at least not in the wild. So for a long time, there's been a question, well, could we teach an ape to speak, say, like a human child does? And so early experiments were done on this, and they failed miserably because the vocal tract of an ape is not the same as a human. What we see here is that there are differences at so many different levels. The shape of the jaws, the length of the neck from the larynx on up. What we have is a human vocal tract is a fairly long resonating chamber. And because it's so long, we can manipulate the sound before it ever leaves our lips. We have found that we're much more successful teaching apes to sign or to use a computer keyboard than to use vocal language. What I find especially interesting about this is that a human infant actually is more similar to the ape than an adult human. That there are sounds that the infant just simply can't make because their vocal tract hasn't matured yet. And one place I want to point out here is the location of the larynx. When we look at the positioning of the larynx for the infant and the ape, it's in a very similar location. Now, first and foremost, evolutionarily, the purpose of the larynx is to be a valve. What it does is close off that air passage that goes to the lungs. Obviously, that's very useful when you're eating or drinking or even swimming, I suppose, right? There are times when we want to be able to close off that part so that foreign objects don't get in there. Foreign objects in your lungs, not good. So it would make sense then that you want that valve to be right about the place where the two passages diverge, right? So we can bring air into our mouths, we can bring liquids, we can bring food, whatever, into our mouths. And then we've got to decide, do we bring it into the stomach ultimately or into the lungs? Air goes into the lungs, hopefully, and liquids and solids go into the stomach. And so we want our valve to be at that dividing line. But what we find is that in adult humans, it's not. In adult humans, it's way down here, which means that humans at the adult level have a much higher risk of choking on food and water. Babies, as they're suckling, really don't. They don't have that same risk. And in fact, other species are designed better in that respect. However, the design of having that larynx lower is an advantage in that we can speak. And speaking is a competitive advantage for humans from an evolutionary point of view. All right, now I want to think about what language is, so that we can ask ourselves the question, do animals have language? Well, oddly enough, we really can't define language. When I tell people this and they know that I'm a linguist and we study language, they find it odd that linguists have no definition for the object that we study. But the fact is, it's just not definable. So an alternative has been developed. Instead of offering a definition, we're going to offer design features of what goes into language. These were proposed by Charles Hockett, and he proposed 9 features that make up human language. And some of them are unique to human language, and many of them are not. We'll start with the first 3, which it seems all animals that are capable of communicating share. The first is a mode of communication. This seems almost self-evident, right? There has to be some way, some means of transmitting the message, otherwise the message is never going to get to you. But it stands to reason that's got to be a design feature in any communication system. Another is semanticity. In other words, in order for it to be a communication system, there has to be a message that has meaning. Otherwise, nothing is being communicated. It can be as simple as danger. So a beaver thumping their tail means danger. There's also got to be a pragmatic function to it. So the message has to have some purpose, right? So when that beaver thumps his or her tail, there's a purpose for it. It's to warn the others that they need to go and hide because some dangerous animal is coming. Then there are these features that not all communication systems share. One is interchangeability. This is the idea that all members can be senders and receivers. So if we think about that beaver thumping their tail, that's interchangeable. It doesn't matter if you're male, female, old, young, all of them can do it. But there does seem to be some non-interchangeability in some animal species. So there are many animals, for example, where only the females can transmit it, and then that means that the males are only recipients or receivers, or it can go the other way around. So mating calls may be gender specific. Another design feature that not all animals share is cultural transmission. The idea here is that you learn your system from others, probably your parents or your peers or other adults in the community. We know that there are certain birds, for example, that seem to innately know their song. So they don't need to be raised around other birds of the same species to develop that song. Whereas there are other species of birds, for example, that seem to clearly learn a particular bird song from the surrounding birds. And we know this because birds that are separated geographically may have a completely different song, even though they are the same species. Or another one would be arbitrariness. That is a case where the form and the meaning are not naturally connected. So if we think about dogs, for example, when they bare their teeth, that's a pretty clear idea that they are about to bite, right? So they're communicating that they are at least thinking or tempted to bite you, and it's a warning, but there's a clear association with showing your teeth and showing your willingness to bite. Whereas there is other sorts of communication that seems to be arbitrary. So, for example, the dance that bees do to indicate where to find nectar, quite a bit of that seems to be pretty arbitrary. Some of it may be more iconic in the sense that, for example, the size of the dance may indicate the quantity or something along those lines. Another feature is discreteness, that complex messages are composed of smaller units. So, for example, that beaver thumping their tail, there's nothing discrete about that. That's just a simple message. Whereas, again, looking at the birds, not birds, bees, there seems to be a discrete part of that message of where to find the nectar. So different parts of the dance have different meanings associated with them. Finally, we get to features that our research tells us only can be found in non-human communication systems. Now, these are always hypotheses, which can be proven false with more research. But right now, as far as we can tell, no other communication system other than humans have these features. One is displacement. We can communicate about places and times other than the here and now. And children, human children, do this very early. They start talking about things that happened yesterday. They start thinking about things that may happen tomorrow. They start talking about things that happened while they were at preschool and telling you about it at home. I remember being really stunned by my children and really proud the first time that my daughter started addressing somebody who wasn't there. She had an imaginary friend. That was huge to me as a linguist because that's all about displacement. That's not even displacement in a real time or place. She was imagining a different place and a different time and a different non existent individual. Talk about displacement. Then there's productivity, that you can produce any number of novel messages. There's no limit to them. You can just keep producing and 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 so on and so on. There's no limit to it, just as there's no limit to the number of times I could have said producing there. So the idea is that we have productivity with human languages, and that's something that all human languages have the ability to do. That is to create an unlimited number of novel utterances. And that number of possible sentences of any language, say English, for example, that number of possible sentences is infinite. Wrap your mind around that. It's an amazing concept. And we will get into that when we talk about syntax, because it is so essential for how human language functions.